medium-sized enterprises face challenges when investing in Africa, especially in getting financial support. According to a recent report by the company McKinsey on Chinese investment activities in Africa, 2/3 of Chinese private companies investing in Africa, or almost half of all the companies sampled, reported that their investment in Africa are self-financed from retained earnings or savings or from personal loans. So how can Chinese institutions, in collaboration with international financial institutions, help these SMEs tackle their financing needs and control risks? And as some international observers are voicing concern about debt burden in Africa by China, how can such concerns be alleviated through successful investment? Welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you on the sidelines of the first China International Import Expo in collaboration with the International Trade Center and the Ministry of Commerce in China on financing and risk control in investing in Africa. Let me introduce first my distinguished panel of guests. They are Wang Yong, Vice President of the China Africa Development Fund, Sun Yuanjiang, Principal Communications Officer of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, Dr. Jiang Hongbing, Partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Beijing, and Howard Trang, Head of Business Banking in Standard Chartered Bank China Limited. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, considering SMEs' abilities and capacities in investing abroad, first of all, I would like to ask each of you to speak about the kind of sectors that Chinese SMEs have been particularly active in investing in Africa, and what are the advantages of these sectors in attracting Chinese small and medium-sized investors? Mr. Wang, please.
Thank you. I think it's a really true fact that you mentioned, according to the report made by McKinsey last year, SME has been a major stream in terms of business, Sino-African business, in both sense of trade volume and equity investment. China Africa Development Fund, in the past 11 years experience, we have very considerable support to SME when they make equity investment to African market by the means of both debt service and equity support. That means for SME, when they have the capital demand with a small volume, then we have a special SME facility focused on African market. So SME can approach to that special facilities through CDB Bank, working teams in many African countries' local office. And when they have considerable, relatively larger capital amount demand, they approach to us with equity investment. So I think it's a kind of comprehensive solution for China Africa Development Fund to support SME when they develop their business in African market.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sun, let's go to the AIIB. What is the picture there for your institution in terms of providing support for SMEs and also your understanding and knowledge of the kind of sectors that are particularly attractive to SMEs?
As we have heard from our previous speakers, that Africa is becoming an increasingly attractive hub for foreign direct investment, with the improved business environment, which is conducive for the foreign direct investment, and also increasing pool of well-educated enterprising workers in most of the countries across the continent. So SME, due to its size and the scale, are more flexible and adaptable to the changes in the market. And infrastructure, I'm coming from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, so I cannot help talking about infrastructure. So if I would like to recommend, infrastructure would be the sector that I think that SMEs can play a key role.
Aren't SMEs normally quite limited in their investment scale, are they able to really chip into large-scale infrastructure projects?
Right. I think that infrastructure is crucial to the African growth. Actually, according to the African Development Bank's analysis, the infrastructure needs amounts to about $130 to $170 a year, with the financial
130 billion
billion US dollars
okay.
a year, with a financial gap in the range of 68 to 108 billion US dollars. So these shortfalls have its consequences, including the bottlenecks in the smooth running of the trade and export activities. To invest in infrastructure is not cheap, not only in Africa but elsewhere. So the financial capacity for those individual country governments is limited. So there are opportunities for private sectors to partner with the African governments in the development of those underperforming infrastructure, such as the investing in reliable and renewable energy supply, water resources, railways, and railway systems. And I think that the SME may benefit from participating in infrastructure projects awarded to others by subcontracting portions of the work, offering equipment for lease, providing specialized and technical services. Direct involvement may also be possible in those small-scale projects typically offered at those national level or in rural areas.
Howard, what's your take coming from a Standard Chartered Bank? What kind of interactions have you had and in which sectors?
Thank you. I think probably the best way is to describe it using an example. We see it more from an ecosystem perspective. Take an example of a Chinese exporter to an African country, and we have live cases around it. It's an exporter that basically manufactures construction wall panels to help construction. The buyer is an African importer. The interesting factor is that by helping the African importer grow, we're basically helping the economy directly because it is already residing in Africa. So if I can foster the growth of this ecosystem between the importer and the exporter, and vice versa too, and given this is an import forum, similarly, how do you increase the trade between the Chinese buyer, the African seller, and vice versa? Because by facilitating the trade flow, we are enriching both parties. And by enriching both parties, we're enriching the ecosystem. And by enriching the ecosystem, it goes back to somewhat an indirect way of investing in Africa. So this is very much a view that we held in terms of from an investment point of view.
Well, it's a little bit abstract. Would you give some kind of one example, maybe, for instance, how you help the ecosystem so that both buyers and sellers can benefit?
Sure, of course. If I go back to the previous example, one of the advantages of a foreign bank is our ability to also have the selection of banks for the exporters in China. So, for example, in Kenya, we are able to accept roughly around 15 different Kenyan banks issue letters of credit, meaning we accept their risk. So when a Chinese exporter finds the buyer goes to a bank, that in a Kenyan bank, that may not be widely known in China, but if it issues that letters of credit into China and the Chinese exporters are unable to find financing for that, the business basically goes away. But if that letter of credit can be discounted by a foreign bank, such as Standard Chartered, in providing that trade, then essentially the business goes on. So that then allows the African buyer then to complete the contract, which basically benefits the onshore, for example, Kenyan construction company, At the same time, it also helps the Chinese exporters in enforcing their trade. So that ecosystem then enriches both parties.
So also according to this McKinsey report, 90% of Chinese companies operating in Africa are private companies. So a lot of the investment are private market-driven investment instead of state-led investment. So my next question would probably go to Dr. Jiang. What do you think is the impact of market-driven investment and the advantages, and what are some of the risks there?
Actually, we talk about the Chinese investment in Africa. We talk about SME. We see a large number of SME who is investing or working in Africa. And that is mostly market-driven. I think that is a very, very good and important signs because the market attracts the investor. And this also shows the confidence of those SME investors or the business owner. But by the same time, we see a lot of SOE, the large SOE, especially for the infrastructure investors, who is working in Africa long time. 30, 40 years since the economic end times. They are bringing most of the projects financed by the storage or by the development banks fund. So this gives a very clear comparison that the large amount of money which is financed the project by with SOE, that is the government-backed or sovereign-backed funding. And the SOE, the SME, they are working on their own capital mostly. So I think there should be some merge or change of the chain in the future. But this gives how we read about the risk profile. And that's we also see the infrastructure investment in Africa that led by the government, either Chinese government and the local, and backed by the multinational development bank together. So this is to address most of the high risk profile of the infrastructure. And this is the fundamental things, and give the basic infrastructure to the manufacturer business, the SME owners, and so on and so forth. I think this is a kind of collaboration.
Okay. Mr. Wang, coming from China Africa Development Fund, how do you look at the kind of healthy combination of market-driven investment and state-led investment? What is the practice? What is the makeup under your management?
Yes, I think these two aspects can be systematically combined. I give you two examples. One is we set up industrial parks in Suez area in Egypt. That is 1 square kilometers size in terms of area. And we do investment on all infrastructure, make everything ready for industry. So along value chain of light industry, we absorb over 70 SMEs from China to located their processing facility within the park. So that's a kind of a case to show us that if we encourage SME and individual SME one by one, it is more risky not only to the company per se, but also the financial institution. But if we can sum up them along with value chain, it will be a different thing. Yeah.
Well, what kind of financial support do you provide them while you bring them all together in a systematic way? From your fund, do you have some kind of special schemes that small and medium-sized enterprises can really tap into and easily?
Yes, in terms of model, I mean, we would like to solve the problem in a systematic way. In terms of model, that one, I mean, value chain is one, and on the other hand, we have another, I mean, a different model which we use also part of value chain theory, but will organize some different SME companies within one African country, which all of these SMEs are experienced in this area. For instance, we identified 2 major Chinese SMEs who are experienced in Zambia. And one is experienced in cotton planting, and other one experienced in textile industry. So we input our money, we invested projects at the same time. So we hold a part of equity shares of the cotton planting one and part of shares of the textiles one. And these 2 can be a kind of model that we would like to copy in other areas.
Okay. I want to ask Mr. Sun from the AIIB, also along the same line here. I understand that the AIIB has not particularly been very heavy on providing financing for SMEs in investing in Africa. What factors have held you back? In the future, will there be more help for SMEs?
Right. SMEs, I think that do have insufficient access to finance. I mean, they are so large to be qualified for those microfinance programs and too small to get loans from those international institutions. In terms of the infrastructure investment, I think that AIB attaches great importance to mobilizing the private capital into the infrastructure sector, because currently in the capital market there are huge private capitals, but little of them flow into the infrastructure sector. So one of the AIB's thematic priority is to play a catalytic role to mobilize the private sector into the infrastructure sector. I think the key to attract the private sector is to create a diversified investment portfolio that covers a number of different projects with controllable risk into infrastructure projects.
So in terms of China Africa Development Fund, we know that earlier this year there was this latest forum, and more financing is pledged for investment in Africa by the Chinese government. So Mr. Wang, what is being done also in terms of collaboration with international institutions to really provide more help to SMEs?
Thank you. Everybody knows that during the FOCAC Beijing summit, President Xi Jinping declared another $5 billion US added to this fund. So now this fund, the total capital size of this fund reached to $10 billion US. According to the Beijing action plan, there are 8 major initiatives, among which the production capacity industrial promotion program is among the key. So China Africa Development Fund will further, on the one hand, to expedite our investment in production capacity cooperation on one hand, and of course will focus more on industrial promotion program on the other. And highly relevant with this one is SME investment in Africa. We will encourage more SME companies in China to develop, to identify opportunities, especially on agro-processing business, light industry, and other areas. And in addition to our current model, which I mentioned, the industrial park model, the value chain model, and we will study some other facilities which will focus on supporting more SMEs companies to invest in Africa.
I was just talking to one of the participants here about what SMEs actually investing in Africa think, and they're saying probably there should be more one-stop service by Chinese financial institutions or development fund for these SMEs, and also greater more freedom of flow of forex in terms of their earnings abroad. Putting aside the financial, the monetary situation, in terms of providing more one-stop service for these small and medium-sized enterprises, I wonder, is there anything that you would like to share with our audiences here? Again, to you, Mr. Wang, I guess.
Thank you. It's a good question. For the fund, given that we have made direct investment in African market for 11 years already, so we not only provide fund to our potential Chinese companies as a partner, as an investment partner. We also provide some, we call it comprehensive consulting service to our potential Chinese partners, which includes the legal system study, which we have collected systematically in the past 11 years, and the systematic study on each African country's investment climate, which are kind of complicated one. So we share this information, we share these research results with our Chinese partners for free. It's our mandate. And on the other hand, in the past investment activities, we have some experience in terms of what are those successful models and what are those we call it not successful ones. So we would like to share the future, commerce, so to make them has a capacity to learn from the previous investment cases and to avoid some failures by other Chinese companies.
Okay, basically to address the information asymmetry that was talked about by Mr. Zhuang. Mr. Sun, in terms of AIIB, what is being done? Are there plans? Are there measures being taken to help SMEs in terms of financing? And risk control maybe as well.
Right. The mainstream of business of AIB is in Asia, but we do business beyond Asia. Asia is developing rapidly, but we understand Asia cannot sustain itself without working with other continents, including Africa. So,
under what circumstance should the Chinese SMEs come to you and ask for financing?
Well, currently AIB doesn't have direct finance program specialized for SMEs, but we will cooperate with those intermediary financial agencies which provide financial products targeting SMEs. And AIB can also benefit from the partner with these agencies for their local expertise and knowledges and also market experiences. I would say that AIB has currently 87 members, including 6 African countries. Ethiopia, Kenya are also members of AIB. So they are able to access loans and capacity assistance in terms of infrastructure projects.
Okay. As I mentioned in my leading, there are some voices on the concerns about potential debt burden, debt crisis triggered by China's booming investment in Africa. So I would like to have your take on the future and what can be done about that. Mr. Wang, in terms of China Africa Development Fund, is that a concern? Are we really adding to the debt problem in Africa or in African countries? And what can SME investment help alleviate that concern?
I think the debt issue, which currently become the hot topic, especially in Western media, it's a kind of, I don't think it's a true topic. In terms of the debt situation of African countries, I think there are many data we can show what's the real situation there. Debt is necessary for development. Everybody knows that. So what's the proper rate of debt for a country? Of course, theoretically, from economic development theory, from public policy, there are some common, consensus about that, but depends on individual countries, situation. Different countries have a different development stage and have different comparative advantage. We need to make a comprehensive analysis about that issue for individual country. And given the current the degree of the heart of this topic, I would like to see that it's just the mandate of this fund to provide more FDI. Not only the money from us as the FDI, but also use our money to leverage more Chinese companies' money to go to make direct investment together with us. In the past 11 years, we have committed, by ourselves, the equity investment over $4.7 billion. And this $4.7 billion we include into African market have leveraged $24 billion, as equity from China to Africa. That's a big one in terms of the capital demand of the market.
Okay.
Other than that.
Okay, I see. Mr. Sun from AIIB, when you are investing in Asia, let's say, how much is this issue on your mind?
Infrastructure by its nature is large and very costly. So AIB from the very beginning adopts a series of very strict criteria to look at each and every project proposals. I think the first thing AIB look at facing the project proposal is the sustainability of the project, whether it is bankable or not. So that is a very important criteria. And each project has to go through a number of assessments, economic outlook assessment, risk assessment, economic treasury assessment, a lot of assessments. So the bank's mandate is really try to help our clients to achieve its national development agenda, not try to add its debt burden. So we are operate under a very strict framework that all the project proposals has to meet with our criteria, so that there's no more debt burdens to our clients.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to wrap it there. Many thanks to my four panelists, Mr. Wang Yong, Vice President of China Africa Development Fund, Mr. Sun Yuanjiang, Principal Communication Officer of the AIIB, Dr. Jiang Hongbing, Partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP Beijing, and Mr. Howard Trung, Head of Business Banking of Standard Chartered Bank China Limited. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, on CGTN. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices or go to